Welcome.
Good morning.
Welcome to Belgrade Online,
An online ministry of Belgrade Avenue United Methodist Church.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Pastor Dan here. Hope everyone's having a fantastic Memorial Day weekend so far. Weather's a little dismal out there, but at least it's nice and cool, and hopefully the mosquitoes will stay away from you. But anyway, we're continuing our series, and we're finishing our series up, a little 3-week series that we've been doing called All the Feels. And we've been talking about, the emotions that we experience and how some of them we tend to elevate as good and others we tend to minimize as bad. But in reality, all the emotions that we have, all the feelings, all the feels that we experience are God-given. It's how we use them that can be helpful or destructive. And so we've been talking about that. We talked about grief. We talked about sadness and joy. And now today we're going to talk about one emotion that it gets talked about, sort of. And when it gets talked about, it's not usually done in a very healthy way. We're going to talk today about anger. And we're going to look at the life of Jesus and how he navigated anger in his life. And we're going to do that by looking at an instance that happened that's probably a well-known story, but hopefully tell it in a way that gives it a bit more context and a little bit more truthful. So I hope that you find it helpful. Hope that you've learned, walk with us through this message and learn how to deal with our anger in helpful ways. Anger is not bad. It's how we deal with it and how we handle it and how we process it that determines whether or not it's helpful or destructive. So hope you find it helpful and hope you find it meaningful. And have a wonderful and a safe Memorial Day weekend, and we will see you soon. We'll see you next week. Grace and peace, y'all. We are, as we've been kind of talking about in the last couple of weeks, we're living in a bit of an emotional time in history. Incredibly emotional time. We got so many emotions and lots of pain, so much grief and loss and frustration. Yet at the same time, so many pockets of joy and so much beauty to behold and so many streams of compassion that are played out if we can see. But there's a wide range of emotions or that are supercharged nowadays. Or you could say it like this: there's just all the feels. There's all the feels. And if we're not careful, we can tend to elevate certain emotions and label them as good or better over other emotions and minimize other emotions and saying these emotions or these feelings are bad and we shouldn't be feeling these. And we tend to label emotions like joy and anticipation. We tend to label them as good. And others like sadness or anger or frustration, we label as bad and we try to shy away from them. But in reality, all of our emotions, all of the feelings that you experience are God-given. They are essential to who we are as humans. And the capacity to feel deeply is part of how we're made in God's image. So in this short 3-week series, we're looking at the emotions of Jesus. In week 1, we talked about God and grief. And week 2, last week, we talked about sadness and joy. And now today we're going to close out this 3-week series by talking about probably one of the most common emotions that we might experience, yet we don't talk about much. And if we do, it's rarely done in a healthy way or in an honest way. And so today, as we look at the life of Jesus, I want to talk about the emotion of anger. I want to look at the emotion anger. But before we do that, let's go ahead and bow our heads, and I want to pray for our time this morning. So would you join me here? God, I thank you so much for this time when we can look at the scriptures and learn from you, Jesus. I pray that my words wouldn't be my own, but that they would be from you, and that your Spirit would speak through me, that we would all have ears to hear, eyes to see, and hearts that understand what your Spirit is saying to us today. Mold us and shape us and transform us continually as we journey on, for your glory and for our joy. In your name, amen. Amen. So, any one of you right now know somebody, and you can go ahead and raise your hands. Does anybody know somebody right now who's a little angry, who's dealing with anger? Maybe you don't have to raise your hands. But do you know someone who you would think of as, this person is just angry all the time? Or this person is going through something in life that's just rendered them angry. It's crazy out there. And if you don't know anyone that's angry right now, the good news is you're probably not on social media much. Because this is probably the angriest time of our lifetime. And you don't have to raise your hands on this, but, do any of you battle feelings of anger? Maybe secretly. Maybe you feel like you might get easily agitated, easily offended, easily riled up. I know I can be. So what do we do with these feelings that fall under the umbrella of anger? Like I said, we've been looking at the emotions of Jesus, and when you think about Jesus, we often think about him being loving and compassionate and kind and full of grace. But Jesus also got angry. But when he did, he got angry in a way that honored God. And so, title for today's message is Angry Like Jesus. Now, disclosure here. This message is going to be a bit risky because I could make some of you angry at me. It's okay to laugh at that. Thank you for that courtesy laugh. The reason it's risky is because when I talk about things like this, it's very likely for people to hear a speaker or a pastor, to hear what's being said, and hear it through your own filters. And if I can be politically incorrect for a moment, it's very likely that what I say could be heard through not just your filter, but possibly your political filters. Because I don't know if you've noticed that just about anything today, maybe unlike any other time in history, I don't know, everything today seems to be politicized on a grand scale. So what I want to do is just tell you in this message on anger, and I hope you'll take me at my word, is that I honestly do not have an agenda in this message. And you may think I do, because you'll be tempted to hear what I say through a filter. But I just want to ask you to take me at my word and to tell you that I don't have an agenda to talk to you about this other than a very relevant subject from a spiritual perspective about anger. So if you do get angry at me today, I just want you to know clearly this message is for you. In particular. It really is. So let's just do this. Let's do something for fun. Could you do something for me? Can you just smile? Just give me a smile. Bring the corners of your mouth to your eyelids. Bring the middle down to your chin. We're good. We're gonna have fun today. We're gonna have fun. All right? So here's what we do. I don't care if the smile is fake, because sometimes you can fake it a little bit and you realize that you're jump starting your lawnmower, so to speak. You're jump starting the smile. It's rough out there, but there's a lot of reasons to find joy. Now, there's lots of reasons to smile and be grateful. I want to be grateful that we have an example in the Son of God, how to be angry in a way that does honor God. So as we talk about it today, one of the questions that people will often ask about anger is this: Is it a quote unquote sin to be angry? Like if I get angry, will God then be angry at me because I broke his law or something? Is it a sin to be angry? Well, if God gets angry, if we get angry, God can't sin. If he's angry, then it can't be a sin to be angry. Some of you are like, stop, don't talk like that. The answer is very clearly no, it's not a sin to be angry. Anger can very quickly lead to unproductive and very destructive behaviors. That could fall under the sin category. But the emotion of anger itself is not a sin. It's not something that dishonors God unless it leads you to do something dishonorable to fellow humans or to God. Then it becomes shadow territory. But I think you probably agree that there's a lot of maybe unproductive anger out there today. But we can learn from Scripture that it is not a sin to be angry. The Apostle Paul says this in the very first part of Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. The Apostle Paul says this, "In your anger, don't sin." Sin's, there's a lot of baggage with the word sin because of how it's been used to browbeat people over the centuries. But the word sin just means we don't live up to God's perfection. It doesn't need to be a shameful thing. I'm a sinner. It's just like, God's perfect. We're not. It's about growth, not about what we're not, So, the Apostle Paul says, in your anger, don't do something that's beneath what you know is right. Don't sin. In your anger, in other words, don't let your anger do something that would be inappropriate. And then he says something else that might speak to some angry people today. In the next part of Ephesians 4:26, he says, in your anger, don't sin. Then he says, and don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. Now, this isn't supposed to be a hard, fast, dogmatic rule that you follow, that you can't go to sleep when you're angry. That's not what this means. But he's encouraging people to say, hey, don't harbor bitterness in your soul. Do you know anybody that's doing that? Don't point. It's happening everywhere. Don't harbor bitterness in your soul. He says, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. And then in Ephesians 4:27, right after that, he says this, and do not give accusations a foothold. Don't give accusations a foothold. What does that mean? Well, that word foothold, everybody say foothold. It's got an interesting meaning. This was originally written in Greek, and in the Greek, the word foothold means a place or a room. And if you can imagine what you're trying, if you can imagine you're trying to keep mice out of your house, and if you leave the door cracked open so that the mice might get in without you realizing it, that picture of accidentally leaving a door open so mice can get in, that's the word foothold. It's the word foothold. In essence, it's saying, do not give accusations of foot. Don't open the door. Don't do things that could lead to accusations. That's foothold. Now, the word accusations, think about, don't leave the door open in a way to do things where you could hurt someone so that they could come and accuse you of doing wrong. That word accusations, it's usually translated differently. It's the Greek word diabolo, devil. It's where we get our word for devil, but it doesn't mean a name proper. It's not talking about a person. The word that is usually translated devil is actually describing a type of person, not a person. It's not like describing, somebody with horns and a pitchfork and a tail going, ha ha, I'm going to make you do bad things. It's describing a kind of a person that's accusatory, that's in this state of accusations. Don't open the door to let someone accuse you of something that's hurtful or wrong. So the Apostle Paul is basically saying, in your anger, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, and don't give accusations a foothold. Don't give any room for someone to come and accuse you of doing something. It's learning how to manage our anger so it doesn't bleed over and hurt others, so that in turn they feel like they're justified in coming back and hurting us, because that creates a cycle. That's what anger does. It leaves doors open for misunderstandings. That's what mismanaged anger does. It leaves the door open for misunderstandings, which could lead to accusations, kind of like the devil in your midst. The devil isn't a person, it's like this situation, tense situation. It's like leaving the door open just a crack, so all kinds of unwanted critters can come in and get their foot inside the door so they can have access to what's ever in your house, You get the metaphor. And that could be part of the reason why so many people are struggling in their friendships, in their marriages, on their jobs. Because they've left a foothold for they left a door open for misunderstandings and accusations when we display anger in unhealthy ways. When we get angry or frustrated at our spouse and we let that come out in unhelpful ways, in unhealthy ways. When we're on a job and that person we feel like did us wrong, and so we display our anger in unhelpful ways. It could be why so many friendships today are hurting as well, why so many friendships don't last long, because sometimes people let their anger cloud their judgment and drive them to destructive behaviors. Maybe it could be how we even conduct ourselves in the church. Could even be that if we're not careful, our anger that we're believed to be that is so justified, it could actually compromise our reputation with others. To where somebody could say, that guy's a hothead, or that lady's one ornery soul, The way we handle our anger can overshadow our efforts to make a difference in life for things that really do matter. So our anger could lead us to quote-unquote sinful behavior that ends up compromising our ability to make a difference in those things that we care about. In your anger, don't sin. Be very careful not to give any accusations, give any room for accusations to come in. So that's what the Apostle Paul says. Now, let's see what Jesus said about anger, or maybe how Jesus got angry. This is what we're talking about in the series, looking at Jesus' life. So, we're going to Matthew chapter 21, and let me give you the context. Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. This is right before Passover. If you don't know about Passover in the first century, basically every Jew in the Roman Empire would travel to Jerusalem for this massive celebration of Passover. And they'd make sacrifices and feast together. In fact, one historian, the historian Josephus, said that normally in Jerusalem there might be around 40,000 people or so. And at that time they only counted men. So that's not counting women and children. So during Passover, if you can imagine, there'd be 250,000 people or so in Jerusalem. And so to understand Jesus' mindset, he's going into this huge feast and festival. Matter of fact, in the timeline of his life, this was actually the last week of his life. This was his last Passover. And he knew it. And this was like 5 days before he goes to give up his life. So, if he's a little bit uptight, it's understandable. But I don't think he was. He knew something was coming. And so, this God who we know never quote unquote sinned, he goes into Jerusalem and he walks up to this temple, and what he saw completely broke his heart. And it made him righteously angry. Because when he walks in, he sees greed, he sees hypocrisy, he sees abuse, and he sees the misuse of his Father's house. And he did something that's extremely out of the ordinary, that seems extremely out of the ordinary for Jesus' character. In his righteous anger, not sinful anger, but in his righteous anger, Jesus overturns a table. And so let me read exactly how Matthew puts it. In Matthew 21, verse 12 and 13, he says this: Jesus entered the temple courts, and he drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those who were selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. So Matthew explains this scenario, but then he tacks on this odd little sentence that seems completely out of context. In the middle of Jesus turning over tables and benches and preaching this sermon about, misusing God's house and being thieves and whatnot, there's this sentence tacked on at the very end in Matthew 21:14, and it says this: and the blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. It's a weird little sentence that kind of just hangs there. Jesus is angry, and then he's healing people. What? So here's what's happening. Jesus is righteously angry. He's showing them that what they're doing is wrong in a very unusual expression for Jesus. And then he's healing people all at the same time. Well, what did Jesus do? He actually turned over a table, and it's strange. Sometimes it's kind of like I think about that. I'm like, if he wouldn't have done that, we wouldn't have this picture of what it looks like when Jesus gets angry. But we can take this and we can look at this and use this scenario. Well, hey, Jesus got angry too. And we can slap that little phrase or that little attitude over to gloss over our behavior anytime we get angry, if we're not careful. If we get angry and hurt someone, well, Jesus got angry too, so you'll have to deal with it, as if everything that makes us angry is on par with what Jesus got angry about, But what I want you to understand is that, sometimes some of us are turning over too many tables. I want us to recognize that Jesus wasn't characterized by his anger. He did get angry, but it wasn't very often. It wasn't like Matthew saying, yeah, this was the fourth table he turned over this week, You should have seen what he did with this Pharisee when he mouthed off to him back over by the sea down there. Woo, like Jesus had this crazy angry jujitsu stuff or whatever. No, Jesus wasn't characterized by his anger. In fact, what we know about Jesus is this, that Jesus is known for his love, not his anger. And when you think about Jesus, the first thing you think about isn't, oh my God, he's always righteously angry. The first thing you think about is that he loved the outcasts, he touched the lepers, and he forgave sinners. So my goal is, just so you know, it's not to inspire you to go home and turn over your kitchen table, and look at your spouse and say, that'll teach you for criticizing my driving, That'll teach you for criticizing my whatever, my I don't know, cooking, whatever. No, that's not my goal. What I want you to remember is this: when we are angry, we want to be angry, but not in a way that discredits our love. When we are angry, we want to be angry but not in a way that hurts our relationships. When we're angry, we want to be angry, but not in a way that dishonors the divine in others or the divine in us. When we're angry, we want to be angry, but we don't want to sin against the divine in our midst, against God. So what I want to do is I want to show you three very specific things that we can learn from Jesus in this story. How to be angry in a way that does honor God. Three quick things. The first thing we're going to see about Jesus' anger is this. Notice this. Jesus wasn't angry about things that others did to him. He was angry on behalf of others who were mistreated. Let me say that again. Jesus wasn't angry about what others did to him. He was angry on behalf of others who were mistreated. Check this out. Jesus wasn't like offended what somebody said to him or did to him, but his heart was breaking at the mistreatment of others. So let me ask you some questions. Do you think that Jesus was ever betrayed? Yes. Do you think he was ever criticized? Yeah, we know it. It's documented. Do you think anybody was ever hating on Jesus? Yes, of course. Do you think he was ever unjustly persecuted? This is an easy one. Yes. But if you'll notice, he never got angry when somebody criticized him. He didn't get angry when someone disagreed with his views. If I can contextualize it moderately, he didn't get angry when someone posted something that he didn't like on social media. I'm meddling. I'm coming for you. Don't worry. I'm coming to get you. Just hang with me. That's a joke. I might be, sort of, but not really. I might be wise, and I've done this to do what we might call an anger audit. It's really easy to think that someone else needs this message, but maybe we should look into our own hearts and ask ourselves a series of questions. Ask ourselves, what is it that makes me angry nowadays? What is it that makes you angry nowadays? Where is it that I'm carrying a grudge? Where is it that I get easily agitated? Where do I find myself on the inside becoming extra critical of maybe a group of people, or maybe even a bit hateful when I should be loving? Maybe we do a little anger audit within ourselves. And let me be really, really clear. When someone hurts you, let's say they lie about you or mistreat you or gossip you or about you or betray you, it's obviously very natural to get upset. It's a natural response to get angry. But the good news is we're not just bound to a natural world. We follow a supernatural God who invites us to do something that goes beyond what is natural. The good news is, instead, what is supernatural, and Scripture is actually really clear to those of us that follow Christ, that when someone wrongs us, we are not called to revenge. We're not called to hate those who curse us. We are called to bless, and we're called to forgive. Let's not forget that. We're called to bless and not forgive. So how do we forgive those who wrong us? And believe me, I'm just like you. I get people take shots at me and hurt me, and and everything in me wants to stand up and fight back and be angry and get justified in my anger. Hey, we're all human, right? But how do I work through this process of forgiveness? And Scripture teaches that we forgive as Christ forgives us. And I don't know about you, but I've been forgiven of so much. And I can find myself angry for weeks at a time or months at a time or years at a time over something someone did to me or didn't do for me, or something someone said to me, or maybe something someone didn't say that I feel they should have, or whatever. But see, I'm a follower of Christ, and so at some point, I got to ask God for healing in my heart. Let the Spirit do a work to help me forgive as I've been forgiven. And when we look at Jesus, he didn't stay angry. If he was angry, he handled it well. He didn't let it bleed onto others. But he didn't show anger about what people did to him. He wasn't angry at entire groups of people. All those Republicans, blah, blah, blah. All those liberals, blah, 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 blah. He didn't do that. He wasn't angry at those who dishonored. He was angry at those who dishonored his Father's house and those who mistreated people. And if you don't know the details of the rest of the story, I'll tell you. He goes into the temple. And when he turned these tables over, the tables were a seat for money changers. And the money changers were people that would exchange the currency so you could have proper currency in the temple, because people were coming from all over in the Roman Empire, and There's a common Roman currency, but there was also, Jewish currency, the currency that was used in the temple and things. So they're exchanging currencies, right? And if you ever travel internationally and you exchange your currency for foreign currency, they'll often charge you a fee to do that. They'll mark it up, which it's normal, it's fair. People are doing a job, and that's fair. But what the money changers would do is they wouldn't just mark it up. They'd mark it up a lot. And Jesus didn't like that, especially because in the temple, this temple was supposed to be accessible for those who didn't have a whole lot. What most scholars say is that he really disliked not just what was happening with currency, but what the currency was for. Because in the Jewish system, you were mandated to be right with God, to come and do sacrifices. And in this case, this type of sacrifice was done with doves. And if you didn't have doves, you would come to the temple and you'd exchange currency, and then you'd purchase doves to do your sacrifice. And it's kind of like, if you think about it like this, how many of you have ever been to a concert or a sporting event and you buy a soft drink from that sporting event? If you were to buy the soft drink on the street, it might cost you $1. If you go to a concert or a sporting event, it's going to cost you probably around $8. I even have it, if you're at a ball game where it could cost you like $10 for a tiny cup of soda or something, because they mark it up a lot, right? Or if you've ever bought a diamond ring for someone you care about, they're expensive because of the same thing. They mark up the diamonds. I did a little bit of research. They can mark up diamonds somewhere between 300 and 1,000%. But this is exactly what they were doing in the temple with the doves. And one commentary described it this way: 2 doves on the street might cost 4 pence. But inside the temple, they'd mark it up to around 75 pence. Highway robbery. And what makes this so incredibly worse is that their system had mandated these sacrifices to everyone in order to be right by God. And so Jesus comes in and he sees them just taking advantage of the system, of the people. And Jesus gets his back up about it, because those who were marginalized and didn't have the resources to either have a sacrifice, and definitely didn't have the resources to buy a sacrifice in that system, they couldn't afford it. And so they're left just not being right with God in that system. By the way, the system was nuts, and that's why Jesus overturned it. Back into the story. Okay, but within the system, it was so horribly held people. It was basically saying that if you don't have enough money, too bad. God doesn't have room for you. That's kind of what it was saying to them. Jesus comes in. He sees this. He gets absolutely irate. He gets so frustrated. Not because of what somebody did to him, but because of what was being done to the powerless, to other people. Thought number 1, Jesus was angry about how others were mistreated. Second, when Jesus got angry, he flipped tables. He didn't flip people. He flipped tables. He didn't flip people. Nowhere in the story does he touch someone. Does he hit someone? Does he whip someone? It says he has a whip and he's cracking it on the ground and he's flipping tables over and he's making a big scene. Now, there's other reasons that we won't get into about why he did this particular thing. It was a prophetic act of prophets from the Old Testament. They would do these big, grandiose object lessons to cause a stir, almost like a protest kind of a thing. And that's all I'll say about it. But Jesus comes in and he's doing the specific thing, but he didn't flip people. He flipped tables. And somebody needs to hear this. He didn't flip anybody off. He didn't punch anybody. He didn't cuss anybody out. And in the first century Jewish culture, this table represented the social culture, the structure, the system that you supported. You sat at the table that you were invited to. And because of that, who you sat with determined your status. So in this case, the temple were excluding those marginalized people, those who didn't have the money. And so the table was full of hypocrites, active hypocrites who were actively pushing people away to line their own pockets. This was supposed to be an aid to help people worship the divine, but instead it was on this table that misdealings were hurting those who didn't have the resources to go into the temple to worship. So in other words, why did Jesus flip the tables? Because when he turned over the table, he was doing a prophetic act, symbolically disrupting the system, but also actually disrupting the system because the doves' cages mostly probably broke and they flew away, and the whole thing, the whole system got disrupted. And he chases the money changers out of the temple. He didn't whip them. He chased them out. It was a big deal. He didn't pull out a gun and shoot them. If there were any. He didn't go grab some Roman cat o' nine tails and, He just chased them out. He flipped the table, but he didn't flip people. Now listen to me. Look at me, everyone. Everyone listening? Let's be careful, Jesus followers. Led by the Spirit of God and not led by your flesh. Let's be wise and let's be careful. Because the truth is, whenever we feel strongly, whenever we feel strongly about something, it's easy to translate our perspective into a righteous posture. Because this makes me angry, that it must be a righteous anger from God because I'm so angry. But just because we feel strongly about something, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're right. Tattoo that on the back of your eyelids. Just because we feel strongly about something doesn't necessarily mean that we're right. How many relationships have been destroyed because somebody knew that they were right when they probably weren't? How many times have somebody been labeled a toxic person when the person doing the labeling didn't do any self-reflection either? How many friendships have become one-sided because someone refused to lean into, calm down. Let me understand the big picture here. The world doesn't revolve me, there are others. All of our stories are in this world bouncing around. Just because we feel strongly about something doesn't necessarily mean that we're right. Some of you are thinking, oh, so-and-so needs to hear this. Maybe we need to hear this. Let me give you an example just for fun. Ready? Smile. Okay. Don't get defensive during this part. I have no emotion toward this. Here we go. Do you know what? During COVID, some people got really angry with me. I'm going to give you an example of two different extremes of people that got angry at me. Ready? Two extremes who felt like they were right and righteously right to be angry. There's one group on this one extreme who would say, Pastor Dan, you should have never opened up the church during a global pandemic when you were able to open up church. We closed when we were supposed to, and even then past that time, but some said you should have never opened it at all. You should have left it. You're evil. You're putting innocent lives at risk. Righteously angry. Go to the other side. People say, Pastor Dan, you should have never ever closed the church building. You are caving into the liberal agenda. I can't believe that you're allowing people to wear a mask. Next thing you know, they're going to put chips in your hands. Funny thing is, some of you are on one side or the other saying, yeah, you tell those other people they're wrong. No, sides feel righteously right, but obviously both sides aren't. It's impossible. I'm right. Please hear me. So many people, in their effort to be right, have forgot to be loving. And it was the Apostle Paul who said, and now these three remain, faith, hope, and No, faith, hope, and being right. And the greatest of these is being right. No, it's faith, hope, and love. Want to know something cool? Did you know that when you're angry, when your emotions are flaring, your reasoning actually shuts off to a degree? And we got to cool down and calm down before we can get back to a headspace where we can understand clearly. And you know that physiologically speaking, it only takes, chemically speaking in your brain, it only takes about 90 seconds for that to happen in your body if you submit to the process of calming yourself down. This is not for someone else to say calm down. This is for you to do it within yourself. Okay? Tell someone else to calm down when they're angry. See how it works. Don't do it. I'm telling about your own anger, about our own anger. It takes about 90 seconds. That seems like a long time when you're angry, but it's really not that long. And all the additions, it only takes 90 seconds to calm that, to get you out of that mindset if you really give yourself to the process. Excuse yourself. Take a moment. Breathe. Get a glass of water. Slap yourself in the face. Whatever. Go in your car and scream a few notes. I don't know. Whatever it takes to... 90 seconds. All the additional experiences around our anger are the stories that we tell ourselves around the incident and the meanings we've made about the emotion. Those stories and those meanings are what ruin lives, not the anger. Sometimes anger is good, and it causes us to learn to stand up for others. But sometimes it could also be hurtful to ourselves and our relationships. Again, as I always say, I'm not talking about situations where there actually is abuse or hurt happening. You can forgive from afar after you've been through some counseling, and you don't need to go back to an abuser. Or if you're in a relationship where somebody is mentally or physically or emotionally abusing you or neglecting, that is not a time to think through these things. That's a time to separate and let that person deal with whatever their deal is, and you get safe and work on these things once you've healed. So abuse is a different thing altogether. Just want to make that clear. When we're angry, let's not convert it into unrighteous anger. Our goal as Christians is not to be right. Our goal is also to be loving. He flipped tables, didn't flip people. Now, as followers of Christ, you're like, Dan, you're saying this is a good emotion. How do we be righteously angry? How can we be angry in a good way? First of all, we're not going to take things personally. We can be angry on behalf of others, but we keep a mindset of perspective. We're not going to take things personally. Usually when we feel someone's wronged us, it really, most of the time, there are exceptions, but most of the time, it's about them, not us. We're not going to take things personally. Second, we're not going to flip tables. We're not going to flip people. We're going to flip proverbial tables. Third thing, we're going to notice this. When Jesus got angry, he loved and healed those who were hurting. That last sentence that seemed like it was a tag on the end of a different story. Who was it that couldn't get into the temple to worship? It was the poor, the marginalized, the blind, the sick. It was the lame. They didn't have resources. He didn't just flip tables and get angry, but what he did was actually turn and help the hurting, and he healed the sick. Right there in the middle of his righteous anger, it wasn't just a table flipping moment, but it was also a people loving moment. Did you know that this story is often told how Jesus comes into the temple, gets mad, and starts waving a whip around? But how it actually happened, if you read the story in all the Gospels, he came in, he saw, he went home, he came back the next morning and then did this. Jesus didn't just get into a fit of rage and do some stuff. He went home, he corded the whip, he's thinking through this. He calmed himself down and he went back and he did this prophetic act intentionally. This wasn't on an anger fit. Right there in the middle, right after he does this act, he turns and he starts healing those who had been marginalized. In the middle of his righteous anger, the Son of God still healed people. Every time in the four Gospels you see Jesus getting angry, you won't see him yelling. You won't see him typing a critical post online. He never says, I don't like this. I'm leaving the church. Bless God, nobody's going to treat me that way. Every time you see him get angry, you see him help someone or heal someone. Every time. You should go in and look at it. Go check it out. What do we do when we get angry? We don't allow ourselves to get pulled on by our fits of rage. We don't act on it. We go and we deal with that in healthy ways, whatever we do in a healthy way, and we channel that anger into some kind of positive action. How are we doing? You all okay? Need to smile again? Jesus is the Son of God. He came to seek and save outsiders, the lost. He didn't come for the healthy. He came for the sick. He didn't come for the righteous. He came for the sinners. He came to show the love of God and the grace of God. I'm literally just shotgunning scripture verses here. It's not my opinion. What made the Son of God angry? What made the representative of God angry? Anything that separated people from the love of the divine. From each other, from God. When you get angry, and you will, don't sin. Let's grow beyond being easily offended. Let's not get angry at ourselves or because of ourselves. Let's get angry on behalf of others. Now, I'm not. We're good. We're human. Okay, we're gonna make mistakes here. You're gonna trip up. I'm gonna trip up. But what do we do when this happens? You get back up again. You realize that growth is a process. You can't say, "Oh, that's a great message. I'm changed." It's not how it works. You're gonna have to walk this out and practice this. You're gonna have to fall, get up, fall, get up. Pretty soon you're walking longer than you're falling. Then you'll fall again. And you get up again. Because this is how growth works. Don't shame ourselves, but we take responsibility when we fall. Not in a shameful way, just like, okay, this is what I did. I'm going to make it right. So if you do occasionally need to flip the table, but don't flip people. We good? We good. I had a lot left, but I think that's good to leave it there. So I invite you, as we're going to do one last song here, and then I'll close. We'll dismiss the service. But would you stand with me? I want you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine the last time you lost it with someone. This might be a tender moment for some of you, but I want you to remember the last time you lost it on someone. I don't want you to shame yourself because of that. I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to imagine that happening again in the future. When you feel yourself getting angry, you feel your heart start to pound, you feel your cheeks start to get flush, you feel your hands start to tremble a little bit, your voice to shake. How can you handle that situation in a way that honors God, honors your identity as a child of God, and honors that divinity in the other person as well? Knowing that when you're angry, you're not going to be able to think straight. So what's one tiny thing you can latch on to remember in that moment? So that your anger is used productively and not destructively. Father, I thank you for everyone here. Everyone here is your beloved child. Your creation, your development. We're all your little lumps of clay that are being molded throughout our lives by the experiences we endure and how we respond to them and how we reflect on them. And help us to grow towards you. Help us to grow in the right direction. Help us to learn to be, when we're angry, to not be destructive, but somehow let that anger create healing, just like Jesus did. Help us to remember that it's not about the anger we show, but when we grow through love. Let's sing this next song together.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Belgrade Online. If it was life-giving and encouraging to you, please let us know by visiting our giving page at baumc.org/give. Thanks again for watching and have a blessed week.